It just makes me giggle. Well, this is a fun topic, our living legacy. What is a legacy? A legacy is something from the past that is still relevant today, which is a great subject for this month because it's Women's Month. 45 years ago, the United Nations recognized International Women's Day, which is widely observed on March 8th, which happens to be today. Which is why the March issue of our Science of Mind magazine is the Divine Feminine. Great articles in there about the Divine Feminine, if you're interested. We all have the fullness of God in each one of us. We have masculine energy and feminine energy. And yes, it's been proven that men are not from Mars and women are not from Venus. It's all within us. But looking over the evolution of humanity, it's very interesting because most of the time it was dominated by a more patriarchal energy that misrepresented the divine feminine. The divine feminine is that creative force in us that is grace, passion, and wisdom. That's who we are as feminines. Grace, passion, and wisdom. But it takes both masculine energy and the feminine energy to harness our co-creative power. It takes both of them to bring new ideas into reality. In the US, it took a long time for the divine feminine to be recognized. In 1848, long time ago, a group of activists, mainly women, met in Seneca Falls, New York, and they had a conference about the problem of women's rights. They were invited there by reformers such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, very big feminists at the time, before that word was even used. And the delegates at that convention created a document called the Declaration of Sentiments, and it proclaimed this: "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among these the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Most of the delegates at that convention agreed. American women were autonomous individuals who deserved their own political identities, including suffrage, the right to vote. Suffrage is the word for the right to vote. It took 20 years later, in 1868, for the US Constitution to pass the 14th Amendment that extended protection to all citizens as long as they were male. Now, if you don't believe that, I have the Constitution here, and I looked it up, and it's like, I'll be darned, 1848. As long as you were male, you could vote. And then 2 years later, the 15th Amendment was passed that allowed black men to vote. Southern and eastern states were really resistant to having women vote. And the women in the early 1900s did these blitz campaigns where they actually picketed the White House. Now that was horrifying for the men of the country that the women would do that. But it gave them a lot of publicity for their cause. In World War I, many women helped in the cause in the factories, and they showed themselves to be able to do things that only men were usually thought of being able to do, and they were patriotic, and they felt they deserved to be citizens, recognized citizens. Well, finally, August 18th, 1920, 100 years ago this year, Tennessee was the 36th state to ratify the 19th Amendment, creating the 3/4 majority that was needed to amend the Constitution. And the amendment, I got a kick out of it. You know, you think of these amendments as huge, long papers. It's one sentence. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Now, I had to laugh at that. On account of sex. We could not be denied the right to vote on account of sex. It sounded a little Tennessean to me at the time when I read that. You thought it would be more lofty. So this year marks the 100th anniversary of the amendment for women to vote. It took 72 years. So if there's something that you're really working for in your life, just realize 72 years is a long time. We expect things to go a lot faster these days. Well, this month in Pennsylvania, there will be a big exhibit honoring women and their historic contributions to America throughout time. And one surprising part of that exhibit, it tickled me, are 3 bicycles. I didn't even know that. The bicycles made a huge difference in the women's movement. In the 1890s, that's when bicycles were created, invented, whatever you want to say, before women could even vote, they started getting on bicycles, and it opened up freedom. And it also opened up the freedom to change the way they dressed. They were restricted fashions back then, very Victorian, high neck, long dresses. They started, oh my God, showing their ankles when they rode bicycles, and their bloomers. And men were horrified. I just get a kick out of this. In Atlantic magazine, they even did an article, How the Bicycle Paved the Way for Women's Rights. And the article said, imagine what it would have felt like in an age where women were still decades from the right to vote and inundated with men's opinions about their ankles, for a woman to go outside and hop on a bicycle and ride as fast as she could, leaving the rest of the world behind. That must have been an awesome feeling. Susan B. Anthony even said bicycles did more to emancipate women than anything else in the world. Isn't that amazing? And at the same time all this was happening, there were many strong, powerful women in the New Thought movement. Out of the Transcendentalist era, Mary Baker Eddy, people started thinking of religion in a new way that ended up being called New Thought, which is what we call our philosophy also. It was a time when Eastern beliefs started coming to this country and blending in with the deep Christian idealism, and it all ended up being focused on the healing of disease. Phineas Parkhurst Quimby seemed to have started it all when he started studying mesmerism and concluded that all disease begins in the mind. Mary Baker Eddy was a client of his, and he healed her of a disease, and she went on to create the Christian Science religion. She ended up writing the book, Science and Health. It was a time in medical history where they were just starting to think about sanitation. They were just starting to think that there might be something like germs that passed on, like we're dealing with today with the viruses. One of the early groups was the Metaphysical Club of Boston. It was founded in 1895, and it was to promote interest in and the practice of a true philosophy of life and happiness, to show through right thinking one's loftiest ideas may become present realization, and to advance intelligent and systematic treatment of disease by spiritual and mental methods. 1895. Well, Mary Baker Eddy, here we go, tongue-tied. Mary Baker Eddy's work was also studied by Emma Curtis Hopkins, who we read and learn from her books, the Brooks sisters, who were very famous back then, Myrtle Fillmore, as well as Ernest Holmes, Emmett Fox, and Joel Goldsmith. And many of them went on to reinterpret her work. And some of the churches that came out of that were the Assemblies of God, Foursquare, Divine Science, Unity, Religious Science. And many of these today represent what we still call the New Thought movement. Well, fast forward to this month in the Science of Mind magazine, Dr. Terry Cole Whitaker, who's been here and visited, she wrote a really great article. And she said, due to our feminine soul qualities, you and I are way showers. We're visionaries. We're role models for an authentic way of being. We live in harmony with ourselves. We're free of self-hatred. We are master manifestors. That's strong from Terry. Master manifestors. And the journey is about each of us knowing who we are as feminine, as the feminine energy. I had a book on my shelf, and I pulled it out. It's by Myrtle Fillmore. She and her husband created Unity. And it's a book of letters that she wrote to people who wrote asking her advice. And there was a woman who wrote her that was very distressed about the conditions in the country at that time. That'd be a good letter to write today, wouldn't it? And here's what she wrote back. While you are more in the realm of the soul, where the activity of psychic forces impresses you with negative phases of humanity's development, you will feel the weight of human woe and will tend to grieve and worry and resent what seems unfair and cruel. But as you raise the divine feminine in you into the Christ consciousness and see as God sees, you will look through and beyond appearances and begin to understand the true state of affairs and be able to discern what is really taking place in people. You will be just as diligent in helping people, but you will no longer give way to seeing greed, poverty, and injustice. You will understand what is taking place is a process of growth, and you will bless this growth, and you will see people becoming more Christ-like. Her husband, Charles Fillmore, another brilliant man, wrote the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. It's about this thick, where every person named in the Bible has a description of who they were. So I thought, okay, let's look up the two Marys that were so prominent in Jesus' time. He said, Mary, the mother of Jesus, represents the feminine, the soul, the affectionate and emotional phase of our being, when we feel bound and limited and when we feel unlimited. Mary represents the soul that magnifies the Lord daily through devotions in preparing for a higher life. She signifies the divine motherhood of love and also represents intuition. So I went to Mary Magdalene. She, as well as other women who were with Jesus and his disciples, represents the growth phases of the individual soul. Wherever Mary Magdalene is mentioned in the Bible, we find the power of love, devotion, and service. I thought, that's pretty good, since my name is Mary. But my second name is Esther, Mary Esther. All my relatives know me as Mary Esther, good Catholic name. So I looked up Esther to see what Fillmore said about her. Remember I mentioned men aren't from Mars and women aren't from Venus? Fillmore wrote that Esther represents the planet Venus. That just cracked me up. But she also represents happiness and good fortune. Esther became the queen of the king of Persia, and she and her cousin were instrumental in saving the lives of the Jews in that area. So she represents the dissolving power of spiritual love and is an antidote to those who have dictatorial wills. So I thought, that's really great. But then there's another part of legacy, and our living legacy is this center and all we do here. You know, a few years ago, I compiled this book, The History of the Center for Spiritual Living, 1971 to 2014. And it has everything we ever did, every workshop we had, who was who, what we did, how we grew this place. And it's in the bookstore if you're interested. It's, for those of us who were here then, it's a fun read. But it's about people, especially. And Dr. James and Dr. Andrea were ministers here for 25, 27 years, and they were our main teachers. And their living legacy includes the lineage of ministers who studied under them, such as Reverend Sue, myself, Reverend Kay, Reverend Pam, Reverend Sharon. I think we're some of the best taught ministers in the movement because they were such excellent teachers. But there's another living legacy that we're a part of, and that is our parent organization, Centers for Spiritual Living. Recently, I was in Colorado at the annual conference, and it was entitled, the whole conference was about living legacy, so it's all wrapping really nicely together. And it's been 10 years since International Centers for Spiritual Living merged with United Centers for Spiritual Living. And there's some really good news. And I put this little handout out of the board desk at 2019 in review. We now have in our organization 526 affiliated centers and groups in 21 countries. That's amazing. We have 888 ministers, 2,547 practitioners, plus we have 4 new practitioners in Kenya who were just paneled 3 weeks ago. The Global Services Department has translated 35 of our textbooks into 12 languages. The Science of Mind magazine reaches 55,000 people a month. And we have, not active right now, but we did have active when Barbara Bello was here, spiritual living circles, weekly small group meetings to read an article in Science of Mind, and then Home Office sends out questions for discussion each week. There are 1,705 spiritual living circles going on in the country. In the School of Spiritual Leadership, that's where ministers now get trained. The program is on 5 campuses plus 4 primary training centers, and currently there are 106 students in the ministerial program. There's a new committee called Regeneration, and it's focused on helping young ministers pay for their classes because it's very expensive. And the other reason they're doing this is that most of the ministers in this movement are 60 to 65 years old, or me, like at 73. But we're getting old, and we're looking behind us, and it's like, where are they? So this group wants to help young people who are practitioners go through ministerial school and get their way paid through school. So I just think that's a really great idea. Well, during the conference, I went to the 2 business meetings and at least a dozen other workshops. And before the conference, they had an all-day marketing workshop, and I attended that. And the Department of Education is releasing this month, they say, 11 new educational courses that will be added to our educational program. A big focus for Home Office this year is developing youth and family programs, and they will be hiring a youth and family program coordinator to make that happen. And they will also be having regional youth representatives, just like the regional service coordinators that we already have. RSC, they're called RSCs. And our RSC is Reverend Angela Taggart in Eureka. That way, if we have a question, we can call her. She calls me once a quarter and says, what you doing, what's new, anything you need. And we'll be doing that with the youth program also. I just think that's so exciting. As an affiliate of Centers for Spiritual Living, each affiliate is expected to do something to help the organization, the larger organization. They have over 40 committees, councils, and commissions. It takes a lot of people to run a spiritual organization this large. And I'm glad to be our volunteer on the ethics committee for Home Office. And I've been serving as co-chair on that. Dr. Andrea Azevedo recently joined us also as a co-chair. Now you have 2 feminines, so we balanced that out with the powerful Reverend Larry King in Portland. So it's a real good, positive group of co-chairs. We have really great committee members. And just so you know, for decades we had our annual conference at Asilomar in Pacific Grove, and in 2023 we're going back to Asilomar. So I think a lot of people will be happy about that. Dr. Ken Gordon, who has been our spiritual leader for the last 6 years, is termed out, and there was a group of 5 people wanting his job, and we are just so thrilled to know that Dr. Edward Villon of Santa Rosa is our new spiritual leader. So that's pretty exciting. Sue and I know him well. He's always been there to help us when we've asked. So by studying the history, not just of women, but of New Thought and how it developed, and it developed through an array of women and men, and by studying that, it is sustaining that legacy that's so important, that lends positive energy to the world. You know, one of the things Ernest Holmes said that I appreciated when I first came here is that this teaching is open at the top. Whatever science and religion brings forth in the future, we will continue to grow, we'll continue to learn, we'll continue to incorporate those truths so that the big T truth is really how this magnificent universe operates. And that's a real great legacy to be proud of. So let me close this with a prayer about all this goodness that's going around. In the beginning, we know it's all one. Right here and now, we know it's all one. And we know this thanks to the deep spiritual understandings of many, many teachers throughout history. We know that each of us has been created by the One, that we're on our own spiritual journey, a journey no one else has taken, a journey that every day unfolds just for us. And so the majesty of oneness, the majesty of being open to all that is here and all that we can continue to learn, is the gift given by Centers for Spiritual Living. And so today I embrace with great enthusiasm the incredible legacy that we stand on of those in the 1800s and beyond who fleshed out the truth of how the universe works, for those in the 1900s who developed things such as religious science, science of mind. All of those leaders we are so grateful for, because they have brought us to the point where not only do we stand in our truth, we stand in truth for everyone in the world. And for this we know, as this belief and understanding expands, we will see a day when the world works for everyone. And so it is.